release national security secrets. He said that Clinton aims to the contrary, claims to the contrary, I should say, is completely ridiculous, although he should say that they are completely ridiculous. Snowden's remarks were taken from an interview that he did with Al Jazeera English, excerpts of which were made available on Thursday, and were in response to a reminder that a year ago, it was actually Clinton who accused Snowden of helping terrorists by leaking details of the NSA surveillance programs. Now, some might argue that Snowden's a patriot. I'm not sure, depending on the definitions, because a patriot is usually, I guess, someone who has a deep love for his nation or something. Let's see, what's the definition of a patriot anyway? Definition of patriot. Let's look that up real quick. A person who vigorously supports their country and is prepared to defend it against enemies or detractors. So actually, technically, Snowden is a detractor, possibly, if we're talking about from a national security standpoint. So again, national security is not really a positive thing in the long run, because national security is just exertion of power by the state. And that tends to go very badly and tends to lead to quite a few people being very disenfranchised with the state or even being unpatriotic. So I've long said that I'm not very patriotic when it comes right down to it. And it's further exemplified by people sometimes not really using the correct usage of the word patriot, because patriot doesn't just mean someone who likes liberty. You know, maybe that's if we're talking in American Revolution terms, but actually it's a person who vigorously supports their country and is prepared to defend it against enemies or detractors. And that's kind of an interesting definition, because it does sort of vary from person to person depending on who you're asking. But the general definition, I'm not certain if some people who claim that they are patriots actually are, and I'm not sure if I am going by these definitions. So when the unclassified systems of the United States government, which has a full-time information security staff, regularly gets hacked, the idea that someone keeping a private server in the renovated bathroom of a server farm in Colorado is more secure is completely ridiculous, Snowden told Mehdi Hasan in the debut episode of Up Front, which is a weekly talk show, which is going to start airing on Friday, today actually. So Snowden said that anyone with the clearances of the Secretary of State or director of any top-level agency knows how classified information should be handled, or at least should know how classified information should be handled. Snowden was, of course, an NSA contractor when he blew the whistle on the agency's programs conducting mass surveillance on Americans and foreigners alike, handing over an archive of documents to journalist Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian in Hong Kong. Now, something that's kind of interesting about that whole deal is the NSA really is acting in the best interest of national security. And the National Security Agency is actually acting in the best interest of national security. It's just that national security is not a good thing. Because again, national security is a concept that a government, along with its parliament, should protect the state and its citizens against all kinds of national crises through a variety of power projections, such as political power, diplomacy, economic power, military might, and so on. Now, of course, free marketers would say, like myself, would say that the state has no business having a power projection through economic power, because the state has nothing to do with the economy. The state does not help the economy. The economy only helps the state sometimes, depending. So the state really should have nothing at all to do with the economy, and there should be no state intervention in the economy, because that just leads to collapses of economy. So really, national security when it comes to economic power is not a good thing. Military might generally means military intervention, and that tends to not be a good thing either. So national security is kind of not a great thing. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Well, you know, talking about your definition of a patriot, you know, as somebody that does not defame their country, what do you do then when it's the politicians, aka the president, who himself is the one going around the world defaming this country and even apologizing for this country? So is he a patriot or is he a traitor?
I don't know if traitor would be the right word, but certainly not patriotic. That would be, under these definitions, probably not patriotic. But then again, not many people are when it comes right down to it. So it's kind of interesting.
I always like going back to the old bumper sticker about, I love my country, it's the government I fear. You know, so being patriotic to me is loving your country, but you can still be against the government while still being patriotic.
So it's a divide then between country and state, essentially, is what you're saying.
Well, it's like right now, you know, we have a government in power that is obviously against the common citizen. It's doing everything it can to waylay the Constitution. It's becoming a more and more unconstitutional government. That is being unpatriotic.
Right. So what's the solution that you would propose then to fix that?
The laws that are constitutional need to be enforced. The laws that are unconstitutional need to be deleted.
Erased from the record, so to speak.
So, I mean, it's going to be almost impossible to do that. It's going to probably take a revolution to do that. But as long as the country was operating on a constitutional basis, we were doing pretty good. But the more laws that are passed that are not dealing with the Constitution, the worse the country has become. And those that point that out, like Snowden, are not necessarily the bad guys.
No, I would completely agree with that. They're not the bad guys. In fact, they're possibly more patriotic than anyone who's in government, because we saw people who were in Congress saying that Snowden should be executed. So that's sort of a huge divide there between the two classes of thought, where some say that government should be open, almost open source, so to speak, and then others say that it should be completely closed off and very national security centric. So there's a huge divide going on there.
Yeah, that's the whole point right there. Is the divide is who's in power at the moment.
Right. Yeah, and it all depends on who. That's right. It all depends on who is in power at this moment. Although it's hard to say if someone else coming into power is really going to make it much of a difference at this point, being that the system is the way it is. You know, it's pretty much set in its ways.
Which is why we need a revolution.
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, that's a little bit radical, but yeah, that would be up to the populace, not up to us, I guess.
That's very true. Just remember what Thomas Jefferson said.
What's that?
They need to have a revolution every 200 years or so. Well, we're 200 and something into this one.
When was the bicentennial? 1975, right? So we're 30 something odd years.
76.
That's right. Sorry, 76. Yeah, so we're 30 something odd. I don't know, man. Dates aren't my thing. Anyway, have a good day. Thanks.
Okay.
I don't know dates, man. I can't remember numbers. I actually am not technically, but I consider myself to be slightly dyslexic with numbers. I'm horrible. Absolutely awful with numbers. Man, we got another caller. What's going on here? Hey, caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Actually, great topic. Jefferson said every 20 years, he said the tree of liberty must be replenished from time to time with the blood of tyrants and patriots. Every 20 years, it's its natural manure. Now, I want to read something to you on what you were talking about. It's going to take me a second to bring this up.
Punch it.
Because I do think it's interesting. And that is, if I can bring it up here.
Computers, right?
and this is actually another quote from Jefferson.
Okay.
He said, "The two enemies of the people are criminals and governments. So let us tie the second down with the chains of the Constitution, so the second will not become the legalized version of the first." I mean, how cool is that?
That's a really good. Jefferson's one of those guys where it's just he's so smart that it makes you wonder, like, how can someone be so smart? You know, it's just it's amazing.
I know. I mean, he was brilliant, and there was a divide between Jefferson and Hamilton. They hated each other.
Oh, and
Hamilton, one of the big, strong central government that central bank, and Jefferson did. However, on the Snowden issue, that's why I called.
Okay.
I watched and read just about everything on Edward Snowden. I don't know if you're misrepresenting him, but let me give you my take on him.
Okay.
Edward Snowden is a patriot, and a patriot is defined as one who loves and defends their country. That's the definition. One who loves and defends their country, not their government. Edward Snowden's problem, because he's not a political guy. I've never heard him say a political thing out of his mouth. He never leaked anything damaging as far as national security is concerned. He never sold anything to the enemy, never gave anything to the enemy. He wants a democratic discussion on the issues of the people in power that are not beholden to anyone. His problem was the big bureaucracy of the NSA, these secret government organizations, that they wield and they hold power over the people that can't discuss it. There's no legitimate discussion that a republic or a quasi-democracy should have on whether or not these types of intrusions should occur. That's his. He said this over and over and over again.
Right.
I've never heard him make a political statement. The one thing I did detect in him is that he is A, a patriot, and B, is not a traitor, and C, did not reveal or indulge in secrets to our enemies to hurt us in a way like revealing agents, so on and so forth, which he said in one interview. I knew where all of the undercover agents were. I knew their stations. He said, I could have leaked all that, but I didn't. I leaked the information that had nothing to do with national security. And that's the difference between Snowden and Hillary.
I guess that's the difference between him and me, too, is I would have leaked all the information about the undercover agents, too. So I guess it's a good thing I wasn't in that position.
Well, that wouldn't have been a good idea because there's a lot of people in here, a lot of people are unsung heroes that have prevented attacks. And you don't do that. You don't do that to your country. Then you would be considered a traitor. That would be treasonous and,
But then I'd be famous. I'd be infamous.
Up or shot.
It'd be worth it.
So,
no, but
right.
see, here's the thing. No, let me posit something to you, though, is that the point I was, okay, fine, whatever, that's fine. The thing I was trying to get to, though, is the definitions of patriot have become totally skewed, especially when talking to people who are actors in the state, because actors in the state will always view themselves as patriots, and they've sort of skewed it being support for their country to being support for the state. So if you say, I don't support the government, I don't like the president, whatever, they'll say, well, that's not very patriotic. It's like, well, then you say, well, I guess I'm not very patriotic. So under these definitions, you're not. But under the definition with, actual, depending on who you ask me, the actual definition of patriotism being someone who vigorously supports their country as opposed to the state, because that's totally apolitical, really. Someone who supports the country is an apolitical thing. It's just someone who supports their homeland, where they are, their personal identity, perhaps their national identity, but not state identity. Because I couldn't care less about the state a lot of the time. When we're talking about state identity, it's like, well, in 1972, this and that bill was passed, and it's so that doesn't really have any bearing on me. We keep having things pushed on us that really don't have any bearing on us. Like, for instance, the renaming of Denali to McKinley and then back to Denali. What difference really does it make? Actually, to quote my favorite politician, Clinton, what difference really does it make? Because, again, it's sort of an artificial thing where it's like, it's called McKinley due to congressional act in 19-something or another, 14, I think. No, it'd be before 14, 19-something anyway. Perhaps it was 1890-something. Whenever McKinley was in, it was the later 1800s. So whenever that was, we'll name this mountain arbitrarily after some president. And then later on they say, well, actually, let's name it the actual name, which is the name that the natives recognize it as. And then people get all upset about it. But really, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference what you call it, because it is what it is. It's a mountain, and it's a cool mountain, but it doesn't really make any difference what you call it. So labels tend to not really make a whole lot of difference. I think we're sort of burying ourselves under labels a lot of the time. Instead of saying what you support and what you don't support, we're sort of burying ourselves under labels, because we are sort of conditioned to do that, actually. Especially if you look at the political or party process, is you see all these things where it's like, these Republicans, these Democrats, these whatever, that detracts or distracts, I should say, from the actual processes, which is what they support, these individuals, because I don't really care about the party. I'm given no reason whatsoever to actually give any credence to any political party whatsoever, because political party is just a template for beliefs, and even then it's not really, because the Republican Party platform is so loose that you can pretty much think anything you want and still be Republican and or Democrat or what have you. So it doesn't really matter what party you belong to. Principles are much more important than labels. And unfortunately, we've become so focused on labels that we're ignoring principles. And it's becoming extremely frustrating when you try to talk to anybody who's, I don't want to say layman, but who's focused on the mass media projections of what the political process is, to talk to them about politics, because they keep saying, well, the Democrats keep doing this, well, the Republicans keep doing this. That's such a distraction, because the Republican Party itself doesn't actually do much, and the Democratic Party itself doesn't really do much. It's just a umbrella that a bunch of people identify under, but it doesn't really say anything about principles. So it's a very frustrating situation that people keep attaching labels to things and going by labels instead of going by principles. And it's a very annoying situation that you have, where people actually truly do believe that it matters that a Republican is going to be in office or that a Democrat is going to be in office. Because economically and politically, we're following trends. Like this president or that president's not going to fix the economy, because the economy is beyond fixing. This president or that president's not going to fix the political process or the political climate that we have in this country, because there's no fixing that. It's too late at this point. It's over. It's ended. But this is the beginning of the end, basically. Actually, I would argue World War I was really the beginning of the end globally. It comes right down to it. Because World War I pretty much led to every negative thing we've seen ever on the global political scale. When it comes right down to it, you can pretty much trace everything back to World War I, where all these negative things started coming about, which was really the war of intervention. It was the war to end all wars. And that kind of is true, because it's actually the war to begin all modern wars, actually, when you look back at it. But so many things have gone bad since then. Maybe I'm falsely attributing blame to it, but even if that's the case, it's just what I do. It seems like beginning at World War I, pretty much all of our problems started. Not even just American problems. I mean, global problems pretty much sprung up from that, because you had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that was very much fueled by anti-war sentiment, and you had a socialist country spring out of Germany where you otherwise perhaps wouldn't have had there been no war, and all sorts of other social changes that were really not that great. And plus, you had the uber patriotic, so-called more like uber pro-state sentiments in the U.S., whereas perhaps you wouldn't have otherwise, and ideas of colonialism coming back, and all sorts of other things that really didn't help us out any. And of course, nationalism sprung out partially from World War I, although it really started out before then. But still, nationalism began on the rise in that era. And really, World War I is where I point to World War I as sort of the beginning of the modern decline that we're seeing, the decline of the modern state. And again, the decline of the modern state is not really a bad thing. As two callers ago pointed out, revolution might be the only solution to maintain it, but I'm not so certain if maintaining it is actually the best option, is the thing. Maintenance seems kind of worthless at this point. It seems like more waiting for collapse and then rebuilding would be the better option. Kind of like that high school stadium that we have in, I believe, East Ridge, where the home side of this high school football stadium has been condemned. Like, you can't use it. It's dangerous. They keep trying to patch the problem, but it's not going to work. It's going to collapse. That's the home side of this football stadium in East Ridge, or high school football. And really, the only solution is to tear it down and rebuild. And I think that's a good analogy for what we have politically, not just here in our country, because it's not like it's even the worst here. This is a worldwide problem where we have globalism. So the collapse of even the American system might not collapse the economy globally, although it probably would. It would spark more movements globally. So it's an interesting situation to see. And it's hard for a lot of us to think of a world without a U.S. or a world without a lot of these different state actors that we have. But this change is inevitable. It kind of has to happen. This is Digital Drive right here on Hot News Talk Radio.
This is a modern world. This is the modern world. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing of
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Here come the Volunteers. It's football time.
It's football time. It's football time in Tennessee.
Join Coach Butch Jones and Team 119 as we kick off the 2015 season in Nashville against Bowling Green State University, Saturday, September 5th at 3 p.m. in Nissan Stadium. Tickets and stadium parking are still available by visiting NashvilleSports.com/Vols. That's NashvilleSports.com/Vols.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection: loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. Cheers as well as jeers as a clerk's office in Rowan County, Kentucky issues its first marriage license to a gay couple. The clerk who refused to issue them spending her first full day in jail, her husband saying she'll stay there for as long as it takes. There's a lot of selling on Wall Street as the August jobs report shows the number of jobs created was below expectations. The jobless rate, though, fell too. And a U.S. Open match last night, briefly interrupted by a drone, which crashed into some sea.
Police rushed in to examine the device. A short time later, they arrested a New York City high school teacher, 26-year-old Daniel Verley, and charged him with reckless operation of a drone and operating a drone in a public park. The U.S. Open, by the way, takes place only about 3 miles from LaGuardia Airport, where there have been repeated problems with airplanes and drones.
Fox's David Lee Miller. Fox News. We report. You decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Definitional awareness is something that we all need to have. Yeah, definitional awareness is something that a lot of us don't actually have, and I'm guilty of it too. It's not just the society at large, it's me too. Definitional awareness is something that's absolutely necessary, though, if we want to be well educated. Not well schooled, but well educated. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. And there's sort of a debate going on, almost a sort of a cyber debate, you might say. Although I hate to use the cyber prefix on everything because that's a media thing, and I don't like mass media too much. Although, which funny because I'm part of media. I'm a media player, but I don't like it. So I guess that makes me good though, because I don't like it. So I'm trying to change it. I'm trying to fix it, I guess. Maybe it's a futile effort, but I don't like how media is run, and yet I'm running media, so go figure. I guess I'm trying to run media the right way. Everyone else is wrong, and I'm right, is basically what I'm saying. So Clinton, according to Edward Snowden, jeopardized national security by using a private mail server, according to Edward Snowden. Now, Edward Snowden is known, of course, for being former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, who used his position, not really authority, but used his position to leak information from the NSA to the public at large, which showed off abuses which the NSA was perpetrating, namely the warrantless collection of information from users, which is, of course, illegal under the Fourth Amendment. Now, what I mean about definitional awareness, though, is being aware of what a definition is. We need to be definitionally aware because we like to throw around words without actually knowing what they mean. Like, okay, for instance, you'll have somebody who's a pro-military so-called patriot who's all about the military and yada, yada, and he's afraid of Obama imposing martial law. I was like, well, I thought you were pro-military, but you're afraid of martial law. You see, he's not understanding that martial law and totalitarianism, while are hand in hand, are not synonymous. You see, martial law is actually military control of the state. So if you were the ultimate pro-military guy, you would actually be pro-martial law. So martial law, again, is the military control of the state. And a lot of people don't actually know that. They think that it's perhaps a totalitarian control of the state, which it is, but that's not all it is. There's more to it than that. And that's one example. Another example is patriotic or patriot. People think that to be a patriot, you have to be pro-state, when in actuality, I'm not pro-state at all, and I consider myself to be quite patriotic under the correct definitions. Now, it's not just a definition that I've made up, because it's very well documented, but patriot is a person who vigorously supports their country and is prepared to defend it against enemies or detractors. Now, detractors, I'm not sure what they mean by that. Again, this is from a Oxford English Dictionary definition, but somebody who supports their country perhaps with devotion or its interest with devotion. Now, again, I don't really support national interest because I'm not interested in national interest, because there is no national interest, because it's a very fragmented thing. National interest is actually more state interest. It's kind of like common good, where you can't really define common good because one person's common good is another person's horror story. So common good is really not something that you can define. Although you might say that oxygen is for the common good, and you'd be correct about that. But past that, you're kind of getting into subjective territory. So, or you rather, yes, subjective territory. So you can't really say that this or that is for common good because it's subjective what good is anyway when it comes to common good stuff. So very confusing. Well, National Security Agency whistleblower Edward Snowden said that Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server while serving as Secretary of State actually jeopardized national security interests. He said that Clinton's claims to the contrary are completely ridiculous, although he said is completely ridiculous, oddly enough. I guess Snowden didn't pass high school grammar. Snowden's remarks were taken from an interview with Al Jazeera English, excerpts of which were then made available on Thursday and were in response to a reminder that a year ago it was Clinton who accused Snowden of helping terrorists by leaking details of the NSA surveillance programs. Now, of course, the NSA surveillance programs are entirely illegal, despite what they may say about Supreme Court decisions or whatever. The Supreme Court decision doesn't really matter if it's entirely contrary to the intent of the Constitution. So Supreme Court doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. Snowden said that anyone with the clearances of the Secretary of State or the director of any top-level agency knows how classified information should be handled. Snowden, who was, of course, a contractor with the NSA when he blew the whistle on the agency's programs conducting mass surveillance on Americans and foreigners alike, handing over an archive of documents to journalist Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian in Hong Kong. Clinton has argued that the information in her emails was not classified at the time, and that the State Department confirmed in an August 31st press conference that 125 emails contained confidential information but were not marked classified at the time that the emails were sent. The FBI is investigating who at the State Department sent the information to Clinton's private email account. The Justice Department has also begun an investigation into the use of a private email server for government communications. Now, of course, the big problem is that a private email server is not really public. I mean, it's not subject to a Freedom of Information Act request because it's a private email server, not a public one. It's kind of like here at the radio station, actually. We have to keep and maintain a public file. And that's cool. It's, well, I mean, it's annoying, but it's FCC mandate. We have to keep and maintain a public file, meaning that any guest who comes on, we have to keep record of that. Show times, advertisement times, we have to keep note of all that stuff. We also have to keep check of our amplitude or our power. You know, all sorts of different things have to be kept in check. So it's extremely important. And a public file is something that is viewed by the public. Anyone can walk in and say, hey, I want to see your public file, and we kind of have to show you. So the public file can be equivocated, I should say, to Clinton's email server, where it's private, not public in her case. So she can just deny access to anyone she wants. Now, with a public email server, that really wouldn't work because we as Americans have a right to see what's on this email server. Now, of course, the State Department have to trawl through it and say, oh, this is classified, that's classified, whatever. But it's still a public, technically, email server. So privatizing it leads to, of course, next to no oversight whatsoever. And even worse, next to no any sort of justice whatsoever, really, when it comes right down to it, because there can be no scrutiny of it on the public level. So a public official is being very private, and that starts to cause problems. Snowden's calling her out, saying that this is actually a breach of national security, although I'm not a huge fan of national security, because, again, national security definitionally is a concept that a government, along with its parliaments, or in our case, Congress, should take the state and its citizens against, or protect the state and its citizens against all kinds of, quote, national crises through a variety of power projections, such as political power, diplomacy, economic power, military might, and so on. Now, I don't want military might. I don't want the state to have anything at all to say about economy. The state's very bad at diplomacy, although I would grant that the state does have sort of a diplomatic duty. And political power is not the duty of the state either. because the state is really not a political actor so much as politicians are political actors, and they're supposed to be part-time, and states are supposed to actually be more or less apolitical because states are supposed to be governed by law, and law is apolitical. Anyway, it all gets to be very, very confusing. But the point is, I'm not pro-national security by any definitions. Like, people keep saying, we need a strong leader, we need a strong leader. I don't want a strong leader. I definitely don't want a strong president, because a strong president or a strong centralized leader would mean one person making a bunch of decisions. And I don't trust one person to make all of my decisions for me. There's only one individual who I trust to make decisions for me. And that person is talking right now. So I don't trust anyone else to make decisions for me. Kind of like representatives in Congress, I don't actually trust them to make any sort of proper decision for me. Or senators. I mean, I didn't vote for any of them anyway. They don't represent me because I never had a say in their election. Or if I voted against someone who's in office now and they get in anyway, I'm not being represented. So it leads to a very undemocratic situation, actually, or perhaps it's very democratic. Democracy is really thinly veiled tyranny anyway, so I don't like democracy that much either, is kind of the problem. I prefer more an anarchic system where I have a say in what I do, and that's about it, and there's a court system. So maybe more of a minarchic system, but semantics. We're going to get all confusing up in this. But the problem is the FBI is investigating who at the State Department actually sent the information to Clinton's private email account. The Justice Department has also begun an investigation into the use of a private email server for government communications. Now, of course, this is totally hijacking Clinton's campaign, which is not so bad. But Edward Snowden spoke from Moscow, where he currently is. He says that a federal complaint, or rather, I should say he doesn't say this, but a federal complaint was filed against Snowden back in 2013, which charged him with 3 felony violations of the Espionage Act for turning over the government documents to journalists. Each count can carry a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. Snowden's lawyers said that the whistleblower wanted to return to the U.S. and was working with a team of German and American lawyers to see if he could receive a fair trial and access to public interest defense. Problem is, probably not, is the answer to that. Snowden is most likely not going to be properly represented. They'll try him with treason, even though really the government's being treasonous at this point. So it's very, very obnoxious, the whole situation with Edward Snowden, especially as someone who's a very staunch supporter of Edward Snowden. It makes very little sense to me that the people in government are so vehemently opposed to him. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that it doesn't make any sense. It actually makes perfect sense that the government would be opposed to Edward Snowden, because Edward Snowden is, even philosophically, just obviously and very plainly opposed to states, or at least the state as it exists today, because the state as it exists today can't exist without surveillance. It's a surveillance state. People are saying like, oh, well, you know, if we don't do this or that, the surveillance state will be here. The surveillance state is already here. We have the NSA. We have a Huxleyan society where we're overloaded with information so that we never see the true information that needs to be seen. So it all sounds very edgy and like something that a 12-year-old would write on his political blog, but it actually kind of is true, which is the scary thing. Maybe all the 12-year-olds were right all the time. Man. Well, anyway, a New York City teacher was apparently arrested early Friday morning, hours after he allegedly crashed a small quadcopter drone into an empty seating area during a match at the U.S. Open tennis tournament in Queens, New York. According to the New York Daily News, Daniel Verley, who's 26, was arrested and charged with reckless endangerment, reckless operation of a drone, and operating a drone outside the prescribed area. The newspaper also reported that Verley is a teacher at the Academy of Innovative Technology, a public school that's in Brooklyn. The drone flew overhead just before 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday evening during a sparsely attended match between Monica Nicolescu, I think, of Romania, and Flavia Panetta of Italy. I can say that one. The pilot seemingly lost control and the drone went down into an empty section of the stands. There were no injuries. He says that it is a little bit scary. That's what Panetta says, actually. Panetta says it was a little bit scary. With everything going on in the world, I thought, okay, it's over. That's how things happen. An unnamed United States Tennis Association source told the Daily News that police somehow located the drone's pilot at a marina on the opposite side of Citi Field. How they located that drone pilot, we still don't actually know. According to the FAA, drone use is forbidden within 5 miles of an airport. And back in 2014, the Federal Aviation Administration published a notice to airmen number FDC 4/3621, the first time U.S. flight regulators have moved to criminally punish wayward drone operators. Now, really, this is an issue of property damage, not so much an issue of, say, FDA, or not FDA, pardon, not so much a problem of, what is it? FAA. There we go. There's so many three-letter government agencies. I always forget them all. I know I don't like any of them, but I always forget what they're all called. Like, I especially don't like the CIA. Really don't like the FBI. I don't like the U.S. Marshals. I don't like the FAA. I don't like any government agency, actually, because I've in all my years, I've been given no reason to like or support any of these agencies. Thus, I don't. So it might be annoying to someone who initially knows me, but really, I'm not very outspoken, I guess, about it outside of radio. I'm not like somebody who's always going on about how much I hate the government. It's not just how I am. I'm just not that way. I'm not a very negative person when it comes to that sort of thing, because things are the way they are. I'm not going to change them. How could I possibly? It's just we got to live with the way things are. And I'm certainly fine with working around government instead of working with it. We'll put it that way. It doesn't really get in my way. I don't let it get in my way. And that's really the way we all should be anyway, is not letting government get in our way. Although sometimes it sort of makes itself get in our way, and that's where things start to get very obnoxious, especially for this teacher who really didn't do much of anything wrong other than property damage, and that was about it. You see, back in the day, I'm talking early 1900s, this would have been seen as just a property damage problem, not really a national security problem, because obviously this teacher had no intent of spying on anyone or whatever. Maybe wind blew it into the stands. We don't know the whole situation. We don't even know for sure that the drone pilot was the teacher. We don't really know much of anything. We just know that a drone crashed into the stands of the U.S. Open, and there were at least 2 witnesses, actually at least 3 witnesses. So that's really all the info we have on it. But a drone crashing into an empty stand is not really an issue of national security. Again, it's an issue of property damage. Was a seat damaged? Well, okay, then he should pay for that seat to be replaced. That's really about it. It's not an issue of, oh, we need to arrest him for flying a drone within 5 miles of an airport. 5 miles is a huge radius. What if you have a house within 5 miles of LaGuardia, which I'm sure plenty of people do, and you decide to fly a drone around in your own backyard, property which you own, assuming that there are backyards anywhere close to LaGuardia. It is New York City after all. But still, assuming you want to fly a drone in your own backyard, and then some FDA, I keep doing that, FAA agent comes to your house and arrests you for flying a drone around in your own backyard. Well, that seems kind of intrusive, perhaps. It's almost as if government is saying that you don't have control over your own property. You have no jurisdiction over your own property from the ground up, essentially, is what the statement is implied here. Now, again, this teacher allegedly flying a drone and crashing into stands is not a good thing. But again, it's a problem of property damage, not a problem of international flight jurisdiction or anything like that. Now, if there was a problem with, say, a pilot crashing into the drone, that would be a whole nother issue. Or if he was flying at an altitude in which private aircraft fly, that would be an issue too. But there's no evidence of that as far as I can tell. So again, it's an issue of property damage, not an issue of FDA or FAA, I should say, swooping in and charging or fining you with this or that. What if he wasn't even licensed to fly? Thus, he's not really under that jurisdiction. So it makes things very complicated. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Yeah, as a private pilot, I can tell you, flying a drone within 5 miles is ridiculous. They're nuts.
They are, though.
Yeah, I mean, there's controlled airspace and not controlled airspace. And even in controlled airspace, on final approach, you have to be so close to that airplane to be 400 feet. You almost have to be over the runway. So really, once again, this is government trying to control something they should be controlling. Can you fly a kite 5 miles from an airport at 400 feet? Well, of course you can. And if they can't tell you, if they have no authority to tell you you can't fly a kite 400 feet, 3 miles from an airport, then they certainly can't dictate to you it's illegal to fly a drone 3 miles from an airport. If you look at aviation maps, they look like upside down birthday cakes, and they show you the altitude you must be in relationship to your distance from the airport. And in many cases, and I'll give you an example, as a pilot, I've flown over controlled airspace because I was out of the range. Give an example. Let's say you're 20 miles from Tampa.
Okay.
Well, I'm just trying to do this from memory. 20 miles from Tampa, you may be allowed to fly at 6,000 feet or 4,000 feet. Now, as you get 5 miles from Tampa, it may be you have to be above 6,000 feet or below 800 feet. And even when you get into areas like, let's say, St. Petersburg, which is very congested, you can fly in controlled airspace as long as you stay under 900 feet. As a matter of fact, in many instances, you never even have to talk to a control tower as long as you stay above or below the controlled airspace. And 5 miles at 400 feet, it's ridiculous.
Well,
This has to be challenged.
It really does. And something I'd like to point out too.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Something I'd like to point out too is what even the definition of a drone is under FAA standards. What if it was a battery pack and a camera that, as you say, is attached to a kite? Is that then a drone suddenly? Like, what difference does it make if it has propellers and flies around, or if it's a kite that has a camera on it? What difference does it make as long as it's under the controlled airspace? Who cares? It's a property damage problem.
The FAA doesn't control airspace below 1,000 feet.
Right. And there's no way this drone was that high.
So that's what it comes down to. They're out, unless it's at an airport. Unless you're around an airport, directly around an airport, they don't have any jurisdiction. The FAA has no jurisdiction over your airspace, over your house.
Right. We're talking FAA property, like as in airport property, clearly defined fences, barbed wire, all that stuff, not 5 miles around that.
Well, let's talk about which has been around for years and years and years, the RC model enthusiasts that fly remote control helicopters, remote control airplanes.
Yeah.
And these things are kind of dangerous. They fly, some of these remote control airplanes will fly at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, and they're jet powered even, something.
Compared to a drone that's just really going up and down that can cause very little damage.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them are even jet powered, gasoline powered. I mean, they're like tiny little real aircraft. It's crazy. Heavy too.
Russell, here's what it comes down to. Here's the scam.
All right.
The government, once again, does not want you to have what they have because they're afraid maybe you're going to arm it. They don't want you with their camera looking in on them. They don't want you over, let's say, a police station, or over their troops, or over an accident that they're investigating, or they don't want you spying on them. They want to be in control of what you see and where you're at, and they want to know what you see and when you're at. That's the bottom line.
It's a universal monopoly.
You got it. Thanks, man. Good show.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what it really comes down to. Caller's absolutely right. It's a universal monopoly. They do not want you to have what they have. This is a problem of property damage at the most. If a seat was damaged by this drone, which this, again, teacher allegedly flew and crashed into an empty seating area at the U.S. Open, if a seat was damaged or some concrete was chipped, okay, make him pay for that. That's fine. I understand that. Property damage is a real thing. And if his property damaged someone else's property, that's a problem. That needs to be addressed. But jurisdiction over airspace, I really don't think so, actually. Now, the U.S. Open may actually say, okay, he was trespassing over this particular stadium. I could see that too. But again, that's not the problem that we're seeing here. I wouldn't really have a problem with that because, again, that's two private parties duking it out. What we're having a problem with here is the FAA saying you can't fly within 5 miles of an airport. 5 miles of an airport. We're talking about New York City, densely populated. There's no 5 mile stretch of nothingness for anywhere in New York City. It doesn't exist. There's not a 500 feet stretch of area that doesn't have any population. So they're really going to try to tell me that I can't fly a drone around in my backyard because it's within 5 miles of an airport. That's just ridiculous. And I really hope this guy fights it, this teacher. And again, allegedly he flew this drone. We don't know for sure. There's not a whole lot of details about this. But I really hope this guy fights it because this is another example, as a caller pointed out, of universal monopoly, where everything has to be controlled by government. There has to be a committee for everything. Something has to control something. It's always government controlling something. That's always how it has to be. And that's not a free country. Believe it or not. That's not how a free country operates. We don't actually live in one if that's how it operates. You can say all day, land of the free, but that doesn't mean anything if it's not actually true. And it's becoming increasingly untrue as time goes by. And it's very, very obnoxious that people will also think that voting this or that guy in is going to fix the problem. We need a strong leader, and then we'll be more free. I'm not sure how that would work. So we need someone to oppress us so that we'll be more free. That's not how you fix problems. So how do you fix the problem? Well, you do what you're going to do, actually. You just have total disregard for the state and say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I don't care what the state says about it. If enough people quit caring about the state, there would be no problems with the state because no one would give any sort of jurisdiction or credence to the state whatsoever. If everyone suddenly, spontaneously, I know it's a wild assumption that this could ever happen, but theoretically, if everyone suddenly said, I don't care at all what the state says anymore, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. The state has no jurisdiction over me, and everyone just disregarded everything the state ever did, then the state would have no reason to exist. The ultimate conspiracy is the idea that you need the state, when in actuality, you don't. The state is the conspiracy. It's not, who perpetrated 9/11? What was the Gulf of Tonkin incident? What really happened there? What was Iran-Contra? All these different things. That's not the conspiracy. That's a minor conspiracy. But the big conspiracy that links all of them together is the state. The state is a conspiracy, the agreement between two or more people. That's the conspiracy. So it's not whether or not, all these different international incidents, what's behind it. No, the state is always behind it. So it's not who in the state's behind it. It's that the state is behind it. That's the problem. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell, right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. Laura Ingram's up next right here, hotnewstalkradio.com and the TuneIn Radio app.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing about
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Expect lots of sunshine, hot and dry weather out there through the afternoon. Highs 90 to 93. Tonight, lows 68 to 70.